Well, hello there and welcome to the live recording of episode 5 of Search Marketing Scoop, the SEMrush podcast. So, hello there. If you're watching live, it's great to have you here. And why don't you say your name and where you're watching from in the country? It'd be great just to get a little bit of information from you so we've got a feel for who is watching. It would be also to get a good understanding of perhaps what your SEO and paid search challenges are at the moment, or if indeed you have been keeping an eye out on the news, what news story is interesting you most? Why don't you share that with us, and we will attempt to also discuss that as part of the live podcast, which we're going to start recording properly just in a couple of minutes' time. So we're live broadcasting actually on YouTube, on Twitter, and also on Facebook. We're going to be keeping a close eye on the Facebook chat. We're going to have a couple of other people keeping an eye in other areas, but if you're wanting to interact with us live, probably Facebook is the way to go. We've got a few people watching already, I see. We've got some shares already, so really appreciate that. Thank you very much. So I will refresh the screen a little bit here, and I will be able to see the comments here. Now, bear with me for 1 second as I do this. And I've got the right screen up now, so I can see the chat happening. Just have to click on a couple of buttons to do that before we start recording properly. So you'll notice that I've got a couple of interesting guests hovering behind me there. I will give them a proper introduction just in a second here. We've got some comments starting to come in here. I've got Johnny White from Austin, Texas. Johnny, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I will guess we'll see some more comments as we go along, because obviously there's a little bit of lag between the video going out and comments coming back in. So I'm looking forward to reading what you're thinking a little bit there. But in the meantime, we're going to start the recording of the podcast. This podcast, of course, is available in iTunes and Android. You just have to search Marketing Scoop on your favorite podcast capture software to subscribe to the podcast. So it'd be great if you could do that. But anyway, we are going to start recording the podcast as proper here. So here we go. Google is rolling out its mobile-first indexing, and they're also introducing shopping actions. AdWords now shows version history. And are you in the UK using an EU domain? You'd better have a migration strategy. Broadcasting live on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, this is Search Marketing Scoop, the SEMrush show that brings together the top PPC and SEO folk to discuss the current search headlines and how they impact you. Hi, I'm your host David Bain, and today's first guest is someone whose role is to stay on top of the ever-changing SEO trends, guidelines and information. He's the Senior SEO and Digital Advertising Manager at TopRank Marketing. Welcome to the Scoop, Steve Slater.
Hello. Thanks for having me, David.
Hello, Steve, and thank you for joining us. And guest number 2 is a digital marketing consultant, trainer and AdWords expert. He is CEO at the PPC Machine. Welcome to the Scoop, David Miles.
Hi, David. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much, David. And may I say you have a wonderful first name.
I'd like to say I chose it myself. That would be a lie.
So let us go back to Steve for story number 1. And that is, Google have announced that after a year and a half of careful experimentation and testing, they've started to migrate sites that follow best practices for mobile-first indexing. So, what sites qualify, and what does that mean for the rest of us? Steve, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts, actually. Well, one, if you're not prepared for mobile, you're either one, really new to the industry of search marketing or SEO, and two, you've maybe just been sleeping on it. So mobile, it's no surprise that's important, and that's been the buzz for the last few years. It is a surprise that it took Google a year and a half of testing to roll this out. But now that it's here, I would highly recommend that people brush up on the best practices and the documentation that Google provides to make sure that you qualify. But what this really means when it comes to terms of the impact in SEO is that, one, it's a change to how Google gathers information. And I think they say in the announcement, it's a change to how they gather information, but not to how information is ranked. So with that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if there's little to no shift in ranking because of this. You can keep an eye on that with the SEO quake or browser extension and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, it seems like the big change here is just, if you qualify, your mobile version of your site will be indexed versus your desktop. And that's really the big change. Now, if you don't qualify, it's a good idea to get familiar with that and put your house in order as far as your website goes, to make sure that you're not impacted when this rolls out globally.
Great. Okay. We've got Teresa joined us from Elk River, Minnesota. We've got Craig Campbell joined us as well, saying this is better. I'm not sure better than what. Hopefully, hopefully you mean best rather than better. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Craig. And so that's interesting that Google are doing this now, and they've taken 1.5 years to do this, obviously, Steve. So they must have obviously wanted to get things absolutely spot on. Why aren't they likely to impact rankings from this? So it's only just indexing mobile sites. They're not actually likely to impact rankings, according to this.
Right, and that's a really good question. So that's been the theory in SEO for a long time, is that mobile will impact your rankings, and it's highly possible that that will be the case, and there's evidence that it has been the case. But when it comes to this mobile first indexing, maybe it's naive, but I'm taking Google's word for it that that's how they're gathering information versus how they're ranking it. Now, with that being said, if your site completely qualifies and you are into this mobile first indexation, and maybe your conversion rate is lower on for mobile devices, or maybe your some of the key performance metrics that you follow are worse on a mobile device. Those might be things that will impact your ranking. So with that in mind, if you are being indexed mobile first, and that's the data set that Google is looking at, or the performance that Google is looking at, and those metrics are lesser than they are for your desktop, that could have an impact on your ranking, depending on what information Google's taking in. So there's definitely a possibility that could happen. However, as when you look at the announcement, they're specifically saying that this is just a change to how they gather information versus how they rank it. But I guess the caveat there is, what information are they gathering? Is it just the content? Is it your performance metrics that go along with that content? And that's the question that will remain to be seen.
So Craig was saying, I was just chatting to myself on YouTube Live rather than Facebook. So that's what it was, a better chat experience here on Facebook. Tim Stewart's joined us as well. Hi, Tim. Hopefully you're doing well. Thank you for joining us. But this seems quite intriguing, that the way they're actually ranking some sites according to their mobile performance and other sites not according to that. How much time do you reckon sites that still aren't delivering a good mobile experience and not getting crawled according to mobile first, how long have they really got to ensure that their sites are a good mobile experience?
That's a good question. So it took 1.5 years for Google to roll this out. So, you could maybe assume that it'll be another 1.5 years as continued testing goes on. They don't really mention that here, what that window looks like in the announcement. But I think the bigger pressure will be what the market bears. So mobile usage continues to climb and increase. And as that climb goes on, Google has to adapt, right? So they're going to adapt as fast as the market pushes them. And if we continue to see that kind of drastic up and to the right mobile trend, I think that will have a greater impact. So my advice would be, get your house in order as soon as possible and don't wait. Maybe have it in order a couple of years ago when the first announcement came out.
Well, it's over to David for story number 2, and that is AdWords have introduced something called shopping actions, letting consumers purchase third-party items through a Google-hosted checkout flow. So, David, is this likely to have a big impact on the future of online commerce? Well, what are your thoughts on this move?
Yeah, I think it could. I think this is what we're seeing here. I think is Google's move to try and become as big a player in the online retail world as Amazon has been for some time. Obviously, up until now, Google have had shopping adverts for some time. So if you search on Google for something that's a product-based search, you will get ads come up which show the item and a price and where you can buy it from. This is taking it a stage further in that they will now actually facilitate the purchasing of the item rather than just directing you to a merchant's own checkout process. So the idea of this is that it goes across different websites and it also goes across different devices. So the point of it is that you've got a shared shopping basket and across all these different sites and a shared checkout process. So for example, you could be on your mobile phone searching for some hand cream, and you could add that to your shopping basket, and then you could be at home later on talking to your Google Home Assistant and ask that to buy you a shirt, and that gets added to your shopping basket, and then you'd go through one single checkout process. So it's trying to just make it a whole seamless shopping experience, basically.
So this is something that I believe was being tested and is still being tested in the States just at the moment. Is it available in the States to a limited number of retailers, or is it rolled out to anyone that wants to participate in the States?
I believe at the moment it's still a limited number. Again, it's not in the UK at all at the moment, so I've not seen it firsthand myself. But yeah, I believe I think it's only a limited audience in the States, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it seeing something about it only being tested with, I think it was 37 retailers to begin with, but I presume it's being kind of rolled out a little bit further. But
yeah,
you would imagine that retailers need to fit certain criteria in order to be involved in this. And if that was the case, then a lot of websites would potentially not qualify. Do you foresee?
Yeah, I mean, because
I was just going to say, David, do you foresee it being a big play into kind of Google against Amazon in terms of the online purchase experience, and perhaps eBay as well, kind of squeezing out people making purchases on individual websites? Or do you think we're still going to see a lot of purchases on individual websites moving forward?
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. So yeah, in terms of which retailers can be part of it, yeah, I'm sure there are going to need to be criteria to it, because, for example, if it's the kind of retailer that doesn't have much stock or is bad at delivering stuff, that's of course now going to reflect on Google rather than just on the individual merchants. So I'm sure they're going to want to be reasonably tough on who meets their criteria for joining. In terms of where this sits against Amazon, yeah, I mean, Amazon, for some time have become the retailer of the widest range of items, not by selling them themselves, but having their marketplace system where independent businesses can sell through the Amazon platform, and and again via one shopping basket, you can put things in it from multiple different marketplace sellers, make one payment, and all the stuff gets delivered to you. And this, to me, is very much Google's way of getting into that kind of model, but instead of Google having a single website of their own, like the Amazon Marketplace, and putting the stuff on there, they're acting as a as an umbrella that's bringing together all these individual retailers and providing a central checkout. And I suppose the best analogy I could think of, really, it's a bit like having a department store with lots of individual concessions in it. You can go around and buy items from all the different concessions in that shop and take them all to a single checkout at the end. It's that same kind of idea, but brought into the online world.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, it's certainly, if it's implemented in a manner that's a great user experience, could have a significant impact, depending on the partnerships and the ease that consumers have to actually make those kind of purchases. But I guess you've also got to think about things like antitrust legislation and concerns that perhaps the Google experience is getting too ingrained in everything that's happening online. But you can also say that they're perhaps defending the rights and abilities of the independent small retailer against the big existing player, Amazon, in the marketplace.
Yes, I mean, clearly, if Google is successful with this, it will make life easier for consumers, and it will add an extra layer of convenience. But yeah, let's be honest about it. Google's business is data, and the more data they have, the more powerful they become, and the more they can do with that. And of course, this will be another way of getting more and more people to have a Google account, do all their shopping through Google, so Google will get to know more about these people, what they buy, when they buy it, and that kind of knowledge is, as we know, is power or money or both.
Well, I guess there's a lot more to happen here, so watch this space. But in the meantime, let's go back to Steve for story number 3, and this will be interesting to get an American's take on the impact of Brexit. It's been announced that after the UK exits the EU, people in the UK will no longer be able to register or renew a .eu domain name. So, Steve, I guess if you had a .eu domain and you're based in the UK, what would your thoughts be on this and your strategy for moving forward?
Well, I guess my initial thought would be, it's a little frustrating because it's now time to migrate my domain, and depending on the site size, that can be a pretty big job. So that would be the first response. Geopolitics aside, that's really the main impact here. And I would wonder too, to ask you guys a question, being local there, do you see the opportunity for people in the other EU countries to be registering domains for people in the UK so they could maybe keep that domain? Is that a possibility, or is that likely not going to happen?
I mean, I think if it's from an individual's perspective, then they could do that, and there could be some agreements to do that. But I guess there would be concerns around, if it's a business operating in the UK that doesn't have any presence in the EU, then I guess there would be some kind of case that the domain could still be taken away from you. And, if I was a business operating in the UK with an EU domain, I don't think I would want to take that risk. I think I would just say, look,
sure,
let's move domains and try and get something that's going to be around permanently. You hear stories about websites registering domain names in countries that they're not based, and countries like perhaps Libya or maybe random little islands around the world. And
yep,
the reality is these domains probably aren't as secure as a .com or another domain name from where you are actually based as a country, and you're taking that little bit of a risk. And a lot of businesses possibly do that because they think they're grabbing a domain name that looks good, but it perhaps might not be around for a while. Have you got thoughts on that as well, Steve?
Yeah, and I wish I could remember the where it was published, but there was even when I see businesses do that, I assume that they're making some kind of global local SEO play, right? So they're trying to rank in a geographic region that maybe they're less competitive in. And to reference the study that I read long ago that I'll forget where it was published, but basically the top level, that TLD, that domain, has a little impact on your overall ranking, so the risk, I guess, if you're not operating in the EU, then you probably don't want to have that domain anyway, right? So that's where those migrations will happen. But if your business is located in the UK but operates in the EU, then you might have that desire to keep that TLD. So that's where I'm wondering, is there a play for agencies in EU countries to market themselves to UK located businesses that operate throughout the EU?
I guess there could be a case of an additional layer of corporate ownership that
Right.
you could actually add to your business to make it legal and reduce the chances of your domain name being taken away from you. But I mean, it's not that common, a domain name. Certainly in the UK, I'm not seeing loads of UK businesses with that. But I'm just thinking, as a business owner, I would be massively frustrated at my domain name that I'd spent a few years building up equity and authority in search engines suddenly being taken away from you, and it's frightening, and it makes you think, well, what are my existing web properties, and where are the weak spots potentially for the future, where there might be not necessarily the same issue, but some kind of issue that might be similar, that might put the domain name itself in threat.
Yeah, and all of that geopolitics aside, and all of those extenuating circumstances aside, that's a good point. It makes sense to know where your sites are strong, to know to take stock of what you have, and then if it also makes sense to constantly analyze your backlinks and know where that authority is coming from. For example, here in the US, I'll be looking at client backlink profiles now just to see, hey, do we have any really authoritative .eu links coming in? Because if those migrations are botched for those .eu sites, or maybe a page goes away, we'll lose a link, or we'll lose some of that authority that comes in on those links. I'm sure this is a small part of the profile here in the US, but throughout the UK and the EU, it would make sense to audit your backlinks as this transition is happening over the next year.
Teresa says, great information on Facebook. Thank you, Teresa. But which person, which statements are you referring to? It would be good to know. Well, the final story goes to David, and that is AdWords now shows ad version history. So what does this mean? How useful is it? And how might you use this information moving forward? David, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, it's always been best practice for anyone who's running an AdWords campaign to try out different variations in their ad copy to see if by changing the messaging they can get a better response, i.e. more people clicking on their ad. Those kind of changes can be, complete rewording of an ad, or sometimes it can be that just a very, very small tweak will make an ad more attractive. There's an example I've read about quite a few years ago now. I often quote it on training courses, where a company had two versions of an advert for some kind of weight loss product. And in one version, the advert said, reduces your weight, with an S on the end, and the other said, reduce your weight. And that was the only difference between the ads. And the one that said reduces got far more clicks because it sounded less labor intensive, and it sounded like you didn't have to do anything. So because of that kind of thing, it's always a good idea for advertisers to be testing their ads, trying out new copy. The issue is, up until now, if you just went into AdWords, took an existing advert and edited it, you'd lose the old ad, and a new ad would be created in its place. So if you wanted to sort of preserve the statistics easily, you had to pause the existing ad and write a new one. It was just a bit cumbersome. And this really, it's one of those features where once you see it having been released, you think, why didn't they do this years ago? Because it's a very simple idea, but it's just something that's been missing from AdWords for a long time. And this is this idea of version history. So now you can look at any of your AdWords ads, as long as you're in the new AdWords interface, this is, and you can click on it and see a version history. So you can see when it was last edited, or if it's an ad that's never been edited, you can see when that particular ad was first made live. And that's a really useful thing, because otherwise, I've sort of had to do this in the past where you almost have to like keep a manual log of what you changed and when, because you can't easily get that kind of information from AdWords changelog. So the nice thing with this is you'll be able to go in, see the versions of an ad, compare the stats of one version with another, and it should make the job of managing that aspect of an AdWords account just that bit easier.
Right, okay, so by the side of it, if you're a paid search marketer, you need to be using this tool with every single ad that you have, certainly every ad that you make a change to, and then you can view quickly whether your changes have a detrimental or positive impact. And is it the case that if they have a detrimental impact, then you can roll back your changes to the previous version?
Yeah, so you can go back. You can obviously undo your changes. The caveat I would put on this as well, though, is the best way to test is always to have a split test. So have two different ads running at the same time. So this new feature, it shouldn't. What I'm saying is, don't use it as a temptation to say, well, I only ever have one ad running, and I'll just let it run for a couple of weeks, and then I'll change it and see if the performance goes up or down. Because if the performance does go up and down, that might be due to something totally different, like some seasonal change or something that's happening in the news or whatever it might be. So I still think it's important to always be running at least two ads side by side to get a proper split test. But the nice thing with this is it's much easier to then see, if you see, for example, that one ad has a lot fewer impressions than the other, well, by looking at the version history, you can quickly see when each ad started running, and it might be that one's got less impressions than the other simply because it hasn't been live for as long. So it's useful for getting that kind of information from out of AdWords itself, rather than having to rely on keeping your own records of what you've changed and when.
Great tips. Well, that just about takes us to the end of our 5th episode. So just time for an actionable tip from each of our guests. So related to, or not necessarily related to, what we've been discussing so far. So let's go back to Steve for the first one. So Steve, what is your actionable tip?
So 2 quick ones, and they're both based on what we've talked about today. And the one first is be ready for that mobile first indexing if you're not already. Get to know those developer best practices. You can Google them, and Google will show them to you. In addition to that, if you're an agency in the UK, get your migration plan pricing down and down pat, and be ready for that, for those EU domains to go away.
Absolutely. And you can find Steve over at toprankmarketing.com. So now over to David. David, what is your actionable tip?
Yeah, I think my main tip related to what we were just talking about with the ads and the version history is, if you're running AdWords for your business, ask yourself, when was the last time you tested out any different ad copy to see if you can get better results from it. And because it's now really easy to find out when you last did it. I was looking at an AdWords account earlier on today that someone's asked me to cast an eye over and check it. And one of the first things I did was looked at the ad version history and seen they've not tried out any new ad copy since about May last year. So they're clearly not looking after the account as well as they could. So that's really my message, is make sure you're regularly testing out new ad copy, because there's even less excuse not to now, and it's really easy to spot if you've forgotten to do it.
And you can find David over at the ppcmachine.co.uk. And I've been your host, David Bain. You can also find me over at digitalmarketingradio.com. Now, we will be recording the next episode, episode 6 of Search Marketing Scoop, at the same time, same place, the SEMrush Facebook page. I'll probably randomly be going out to YouTube and Facebook and Twitter at the same time, but here is probably where the chat is going to be on Wednesday, the 18th of April 2018. where my guests are scheduled to be Richard Fergie from eAnalytica and the one and only Barry Schwartz from Rusty Brick. In the meantime, thanks not only to David and Steve, but thanks to you for tuning in and being a part of it. But until we meet again, be fantabulous and do one thing that scares you. Adios.